And showtime. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another episode of the Channel Pro 5-Minute Roundup. Look at news, trends, and tips for the SMB channel in 5 minutes or thereabouts. My name is Rich Freeman. I'm executive editor of the Channel Pro Network, also a co-host of this program. I am joined this week, as I am every week, by your other co-host, Eric Simpson, a business transformation and improvement advisor to MSPs and other IT providers. Eric, how you doing?
I'm doing well, Rich. At the moment, when our viewers are watching or our listeners are listening to this, I'm somewhere on a ski slope. So we're pre-recording this episode of the 5 Minute Roundup in advance, while I enjoy a little bit of well-earned R&R, Rich.
Indeed, we are, and you're absolutely right. Well-earned R&R, and this is an amazing optical illusion you're performing right here, Eric, because it looks like you're podcasting, but you're actually skiing, and that is a great thing. So, yeah, this is a pre-recorded show, folks. We're going to dive into the top story here, and we deliberately selected something that's kind of an evergreen, because obviously, if we did something news-related, it probably wouldn't be news by the time you were listening to or watching this. This is actually something that appeared in the most recent issue of Channel Pro's monthly magazine, and it's an article we ran about avoiding burnout. Now, we have written before at Channel Pro about the importance of physical health, about getting your rest and your exercise and eating right, and how that really is an important contributor to your long-term success in this industry. Even though you're going to be very busy, you got to take care of yourself physically to be ready to go for the long haul. We haven't written as much about mental health and taking care of yourself that way as well. And as I think everybody knows, the last 2-3 years have been a little bit stressful for everybody, not just in the IT industry, but maybe particularly for MSPs, because you found yourself early in 2020 suddenly getting your customers ready for work from home with little warning. You took a crash course that year in remote work security. People have been working from home. MSPs and their techs have been working from home. You don't have maybe that support network you have in the office the way you did before. And so a lot of channel pros are a little bit more vulnerable to burnout now than they have been in the past. And so we wanted to talk a little bit about that, how to spot it, what to do about it. Now, let's define burnout a little bit. We're not just talking about fatigue or stress. One of the sources consulted in the articles defined burnout as ongoing and unmanageable job-related stress. And some of the symptoms he identified are exhaustion, emotional, physical, psychological, and typically probably all of those at once. Being short-tempered, being impatient with people, having difficulty concentrating, maybe having a sense of hopelessness or powerlessness. Some combination of these factors, if you spot that in yourself or somebody working for you, that's a sign of burnout. And it is important to be watching for those symptoms, both in yourself and in your employees. The two big pieces of advice in this article are to be aware and be proactive. And the aware part, obviously, is to be monitoring yourself and your company for people who might be suffering from burnout. The proactive part is about watching out in advance for some of the things that could lead you into burnout. So what you want to do with yourself and with your employees is understand what are the stressors, the frustrations that could produce burnout. And to the extent that you can ease those for yourself, you want to do that. And then to the extent that you can ease them for your employees as well. So talk to your techs, find out, what is it that is most stressful or frustrating for them in the job. It's going to be different with everyone else. You can't eliminate all these things necessarily. But if there are things that you can do that will prevent a tech from reaching the burnout stage, that's going to be a really good thing for you and your company. So I think it's an important, it's in a lot of ways a timeless issue, Eric, but maybe a particularly important issue within the last few years, because there's been a lot of stress and a lot of work these past few years.
Yeah, you're right, Rich. And I think a lot of that, can be tied back to what we're seeing, in this kind of quiet quitting mentality, and people kind of exiting and not wanting to go back into the office, after having an experience of remote work. So it is especially, tough to proactively build a program around monitoring the mental health of our staff. I mean, this is, not something that we typically think about when we're building a culture in our organization, at least, that I've seen, in my career in IT. It's kind of been a, buck up, we got to get this stuff done. And, it's been left to the individual, whether it's an employee or a leader or a support person, to kind of recover on their own. I lived that, especially back in my enterprise days before I decided to, start an MSP practice. So I think the guidance here might be, how to structure a program that's, simple to administer, but then provides the entire staff an opportunity to have, open two-way communication and feel like they are being seen and they're being heard, right? And maybe, if we do that in addition to, addressing some of their particular challenges that they're having with process, with platforms, with each other, the people friction component, that could help, reduce churn and attrition as well. I recently went through an exercise with a client of mine where I met with their leadership team, and we were going to do some team building with the entire organization, starting with the leadership team, then the managers, and then the staff. And we got down to the manager level, and a couple of key questions that I asked them was, what is it? I think we might have talked about this on a previous episode, but what is it that the company is doing that they should stop doing, in your opinion? What is something that the company should absolutely start doing? And then if you had the opportunity to wipe the whiteboard clean and write your ideal job role within the organization, what would that look like? So including those kinds of conversations along with kind of these, you know, I would say just, checkups, and not a performance related type of a measurement or a discussion. It's more of a, hey, let's take a few minutes and let's go out to lunch. Let's grab a coffee. Let's sit down, and have that empathetic person to person communication. I know a lot of MSP partners that make it a non-negotiable to have in their calendars a meeting, a lunch, a coffee with every single one of their team on a regular basis. And this is scheduled, and they go out and they go offsite, and it's just about this, getting to know each other, getting to understand, what's stressing someone out, what opportunities do they see, and feeling, real empathetic about them as an individual and their families. And in fact, in John Maxwell's excellent book, The Five Levels of Leadership, he talks about the importance of getting past that first level of leadership into the second level of leadership. The first level of leadership is kind of it's title leadership, that positional leadership where you'll do what you're supposed to do because you report to me and I have a title that says I'm managing you, right? So that's when you get, that employee syndrome, like I'll do my 8 hours, I'll punch in at 8, I'll punch out at 5, but I'm not going the extra mile, right, for you. The second level of leadership is when you work diligently, Rich, to build that relationship with that individual and to demonstrate that you care about them, you care about, what they want to do with their career, their future, you care about their families. And when they feel that connection and they feel like you have their back, then that's when they'll start going above and beyond, or maybe being more open and more candid about their feedback about the organization and not feel threatened about that. There are several other levels of leadership beyond that, but I think that second level of leadership is really ties into what, the article talks about here, and some of the things that we can do to try to, build that bridge and build that connection with our staff and identify the early signs of someone needing, some extra time off. Because that's what, typically comes from these conversations, like, oh wow, you know what, why don't you take, next Friday off, we'll work around it, go recharge, do something fun with the family. Those little things that mean a lot, that go a long way to kind of reduce that mental burden or stress. Otherwise, we're just moving forward at a million miles an hour and no looking back, right? So it's really important to take the time to evaluate these things, to have these conversations, to show empathy, to have two-way, open, candid communications to build the trust in the staff that allows them to be forthcoming rather than kind of like, well, I say this, but I'm really thinking this.
Important stuff. One more really good reason to be having those one-to-one conversations with your staff, and one more topic to bring up: career development, absolutely, but do talk to them as well about just how they're doing personally, physically, emotionally, etc. So, Eric, let's move on to your tip of the week here. If you are not having that kind of burnout-related conversation with your techs, that is an oversight in that particular kind of meeting. Your tip of the week this week has to do with a different kind of mistake that MSPs can and often do make in an onboarding conversation with a customer.
That's right, Rich. And again, ripped from the headlines, conversation I just had this morning with an MSP client of mine, and they were sharing with me some challenges they're having with one of their brand new clients. And it's basically they've been kind of set back on their heels, kind of firefighting and addressing some needs of the new client's staff before they've even begun onboarding them properly. So this has been kind of a, tail wagging the dog syndrome where, we had a conversation today and they said, look, we're experiencing all of this and we're reacting and firefighting so much that we haven't even been able to begun the onboarding process properly, officially with this client. And, from my perspective, Rich, this all ties back to not setting the appropriate expectations during the sales conversation that indicate that the first thing that we're going to do is schedule an onboarding kickoff meeting with the client and their leadership. And during that meeting is where we set the ground rules for the engagement, the playbook, the expectations, the shared accountability between the MSP and the business owner and their staff themselves. And so there's an agenda that we sit down and cover with the client that explains from a high level what the phases of onboarding look like, what the expectations are for service being delivered on a best effort basis while onboarding is going on. So the expectation is, hey, we will provide service, but it's a best effort basis. So, let's understand that until we receive all of this information that you need to provide to us during that initial onboarding, the discovery process, and MSPs, what I'm talking about, who all the, what all the names are of the users, their email addresses and what their roles are, the asset discovery information that we need, everything that we need to provision that environment and the users into our systems in order to begin delivering service is critical. And so we set that expectation with the client. There's a definite direct kind of take the bull by the horns approach to this. So there's in no uncertain terms, this is how we're going to onboard you. This is what to expect professionally, but directly, right? So there's no gray area. And one of the comments that was surfaced today during our conversation, Rich, was some of the users pushing back because they didn't particularly like the brand of something as ridiculous as a laptop dock, right? And so I said, listen, this is all handled during onboarding where we are going to deploy our recommended services, solutions, hardware, etc., because that's what we're trained on. These are the relationships we have with our vendors and warranties and things like that. And, asking, having a discussion or, a negotiation that can, cause some friction about the particular brand of something just should not be part of the conversation. It's almost like, you take your car to your dealership and they say, well, you need to replace the alternator. And you say, okay, well, I want you guys to use this alternator, from some other manufacturer. And the dealer's like, are you kidding me? No, we stand by our cars and by, what's in our cars because we support it and we manage it and we maintain it. So, you have to be very direct during the onboarding kickoff meeting, and then you have to deploy the onboarding project as rapidly as possible. And, I think a lot of MSPs, Rich, think that, you know, this is an opportunity where we got to keep everybody happy and pleasant and all that to a point, right? You've got to get the job done. You've got to onboard them as quickly as possible, because the longer it takes to onboard a client, the more dissatisfied they can become, because we are simply reacting on a best effort basis to their needs. So it's important to illustrate during that meeting that we have to move quickly. The client's responsibility is to provide us the information within, you know, 7 days, right? Give them a timeline. We need this information back from you within this time frame, so that we do not delay the onboarding process, and to clearly get the client to understand and confirm that their main job during the onboarding process is not only to provide us the information we need as quickly as possible, but to approve change quickly, right? Because we're going to find things during onboarding that we didn't assume when we first engaged and gave that client that proposal, right? We have, when we build that proposal for service, there are things that we know, the known, and there are things that we don't know yet. But there are also things that we assume. So when we build that proposal, it's like, here are the things that we know, here are the things that we assume. And so we're going to price our proposal this way. But for the things that come up, the unknowns that we discovered during that onboarding process, we're going to implement the change management process, which means there will be a change request made. The client's job is to approve that change quickly so that we can get past the onboarding phase and really begin delivering the service that environment needs.
Two sort of success rules that this reminds me of, and one applies to any business, really, certainly any service business, which is 80% of success is managing expectations. And this is the classic case of, if you are managing expectations well, onboarding process is going to go a lot more smoothly. If you're not, you're vulnerable to these kind of problems cropping up. The other thing is just that if there is any point in the life cycle of your relationship with a client where it's a good idea to over communicate a little bit, it is during that onboarding process, in terms, as you were saying, of collecting the information that you need, and also checking in with the customer regularly and making sure things are going okay and telling them what's going to happen next and so on. So yeah, very strong advice. The onboarding process is really huge. Setting expectations going into that and during that process, very important. And then staying in contact, making sure that the customer understands what you're doing and why you're doing it, and that they're satisfied with what you're doing. Super, super important. And Eric, it leaves us time for just one more story this week. This is one that's going to give any homeowner shudders, I think, because it concerns a homeowner in California who was having a bit of an insect problem, did what anyone does, called in a pest control expert to check it out. Pest control expert figured, because this is typically what happens in this situation, there's probably a dead animal inside the wall somewhere. And so he starts looking around inside the wall, and it was not actually a dead animal. He found acorns inside that wall. And when I say acorns, Eric, apparently what had been happening is a woodpecker, maybe a few, had been depositing acorns inside this wall for some period of time. We're not talking 50, 100, even 200 acorns. We're talking about 700 pounds of acorns. The best estimate is that it took 2 to 5 years for these woodpeckers to store 700 pounds of acorns inside a lifetime supply of acorns, Eric. It took 8 hours to get them out of there. And then, of course, so the woodpeckers had poked a hole in the chimney stack, and that's how they were dropping the stuff. You had to patch that. You still had the insect problem. Just a nightmare. But yeah, a little gift to a homeowner from our friends, the woodpeckers.
Woodpeckers gone wrong.
So, folks, that is all the time we've got for you this week on the 5-Minute Roundup. We thank you so much for joining us. We're going to be back again next week with another episode for you. Eric's going to bring his best skiing tan with him, and you'll know just how much fun he's having right now as you are listening to or viewing this podcast. And you can listen or watch it, actually, because we're both a video and a podcast. So if you're watching the video, you're into podcasts, go to wherever you get your podcasts, Apple, Google, Stitcher, you name it. You're going to find us there. Please take the time to subscribe, rate, and review. We very much appreciate it. If you're listening to a podcast, but you want to watch the video, best thing to do, go to YouTube, look for the ChannelPro Network channel there. Again, another opportunity to subscribe. And if you click that bell icon, you'll even get notified when the new episodes become available. You can read the article that we were talking about earlier about avoiding burnout and all sorts of other great news and information, insights for growing your business every day at channelpronetwork.com. And if you want to learn more about Eric and the work he does with his clients, you should visit ericksimpson.com. That is ERICK Simpson.com. So once again, folks, we thank you very much for listening. We're going to be back with you next week. Until then, please enjoy the rest of your week. Eric and I are enjoying the rest of your week already.